Every day, countless people surrender their power without even realizing it. Emotional exhaustion, toxic influences, and constant external pressures chip away at confidence and clarity. But you don't have to live that way. In this audiobook, How to Emotionally Detach and Take Back Your Power, you'll discover a step-by-step path to reclaim your energy, strengthen your inner voice, and navigate life on your terms. You'll learn how to recognize toxic patterns, set boundaries, detach from outcomes, and prioritize peace over constant reactivity. By applying these practical strategies, you'll cultivate resilience, self-respect, and unshakable clarity, transforming the way you respond to people, challenges, and opportunities. If you're ready to stop giving away your emotional power and start living with intention, this audiobook will guide you every step of the way. Subscribe to Audiobook Tone for more transformative content designed to elevate your mind, your life, and your potential. Number 1. Recognize toxic patterns. Set boundaries. Recognize the patterns that keep the heart tied to old wounds, and the mind will find its freedom. Start by noticing the small, recurring motions of thought and feeling that return like a bad season. The tightening at the throat when a message arrives, the instant replay of an old argument, the automatic apology that precedes the truth. These are not vague inclinations. They are habits of the nervous system, trained by past experiences and repeated until they feel inevitable. Naming them dissolves some of their power because naming places the experience outside of the reflexive self and into the domain of observation. To recognize a toxic pattern, track the pattern for a week with simple observation. When frustration rises, pause and record what happened just before it. A tone, a phrase, a memory. Do not argue with the feeling. Describe it. This practice interrupts autopilot and creates the necessary distance between stimulus and response. Distance is not coldness. It is the space where choice can emerge. Boundaries are the muscle memory that follows recognition. A boundary is a clear, lived limit, an action, a time, a refusal, or a policy that protects the edge of an inner life. Boundaries are not punishments or manipulations. They are agreements with reality about what behavior is permitted around the self. Implementing a boundary requires 3 steps. Decide, communicate, enforce. Decide what is unacceptable, state it plainly, and follow through. Small enforcement builds credibility. A single consistent follow-through rewires expectations. Inconsistency teaches others to test again. Practical examples sharpen this idea. If a conversation routinely ends with anger and guilt, decide to limit conversations about that topic to 10 minutes, or to end the call when name-calling begins. If a friend drains energy with frequent crises, schedule appointments for support twice a week for 50 minutes, and avoid being the free, always-on therapist. If a partner dismisses emotions, hold the line. When dismissal happens, leaving the room is the consequence. Discussion resumes when respect returns. These are not cruel policies. They are clear structures that preserve the capacity to give without annihilating the giver. The body will resist change. Expect a physiological protest, adrenaline spikes, stomach tightness, a rise in chest pressure. This is proof that the boundary matters. Signal this to the body with a simple ritual: 3 deep breaths, a quick walk outside, or placing both hands on the table to root into the present. Rituals anchor new responses into the nervous system and quiet the emergent panic that wants reconciliation at any cost. The brief discomfort of boundary enforcement is evidence of growth, like the burn that indicates a muscle strengthening. Language matters. Prepare short, non-accusatory phrases that communicate the boundary without begging for approval. Use direct statements and firm, brief wording. I won't engage when shouting happens, or I can't be available after 9 p.m. Avoid long justifications. Energy spent defending a boundary is energy diverted from living it. After the statement, be silent. Silence is far more effective than elaborate persuasion. Silence is not an absence of force. It is the simplest and most dignified enforcement. Expect testing. People test limits in the same way water tests a new dam. If a parent is used to late-night calls, the first boundary may provoke upset. That is acceptable. When testing occurs, respond with the original boundary statement and the consequence. If the consequence is leaving a room or ending a call, do it calmly and without drama. Consistency is the currency of boundaries. Inconsistency signals that the boundary is negotiable. A boundary that bends becomes a request. There is an ethical backbone to setting limits. Boundaries are primarily for the one who sets them. Protecting personal time or emotional bandwidth is not selfish in a pejorative sense. It is responsible. A clear inner economy must be maintained. Consider emotional energy like a finite daily budget. Spend it where the return is meaningful. Relationships that uplift, projects that advance purpose, rest that restores function. Repetitive giving to those who neither respect nor reciprocate is a slow theft masked by good intentions. Recognizing toxic patterns includes noticing the stories that justify staying. For instance, the narrative "I must fix them" or "I caused this" often operates beneath surface actions. These stories generate savior behavior and endless blame. Rewrite the narrative to an accountable version. Support will be offered where appropriate. Responsibility for another's healing rests with them. Ownership without martyrdom keeps agency intact. This shifts the posture from indentured caregiver to deliberate partner in the human work of repair. Practical exercises accelerate learning. First exercise, a 30-day boundary map. List the top 5 recurring emotional drains. For each, write one specific boundary and a backup consequence. Calendar the enforcement. Assign dates and short reminders. The calendar makes the boundary a public fact, not a wish. Check progress weekly and adjust only based on real outcomes, not on guilt. Second exercise, the emotional pause. When triggered, count to 4, breathe, and name the sensation. Say aloud one sentence that begins with "I notice" and ends with the description, "I notice tension in my shoulder." Naming dissolves reactivity by assigning the feeling to observation rather than identity. Practice this in low-stakes moments until it becomes a reflex. When the pause is consistent, response can be brazen rather than an act. Third exercise, role clarity statements. Write concise answers to the question, "What is my role here?" For relationships, clearly define whether the role is supporter, partner, friend, parent, or professional. Keep it short. Rehearse these statements silently before engaging in difficult conversations. Role clarity reduces scope creep, the tendency to take on responsibilities outside one's remit. Boundaries sometimes bring loss. People will step back. Closeness may lessen. This pain is part of realigning the social field to match values. The discomfort is not a failure. It is an honest signal that the former connection depended on access to compromise. Honor the grief and proceed with the work. Grief and growth are often entwined. A patch of sadness after boundary enforcement becomes a clear classroom for learning what truly nourishes. Resilience grows with ritual. Create a daily replenishment habit that is non-negotiable. 20 minutes of uninterrupted reading, 30 minutes of movement, or a solitude window at dawn. Treat this habit as a boundary with the self defended against urgency and distraction. The strength to hold external boundaries is drawn from the discipline of internal ones. A person who keeps small promises to themselves can keep larger promises to life. The quiet commitment to inner practice is the forge where a steadier presence is made. Compassion must be present but distinguished from codependence. Compassion is a firm, calm willingness to acknowledge another's suffering while refusing to collapse into it. It looks like offering information about resources, holding a steady presence for a limited period, and recommending professional support when necessary. Codependence disguises enabling as care. Enabling exhausts both parties. Care multiplies when it is bounded. Enabling drains. Measure progress in observable actions, not in moral self-assessments. A scorecard helps. Tally boundary enforcements. Count days where the emotional pause was used. Note instances of energy reclaimed. Hours returned to personal projects. Evenings kept free. Physical markers. More sleep, fewer headaches, increased productivity are truer indicators than subjective feelings of righteousness. Concrete progress fuels further discipline. Finally, tend to the inner script. Replace internal lines like "worth must be proven" with "worth needs no proving." This shift is not magical, but cumulative. Each refusal to act from fear registers as a small victory. Each consistent boundary constructs a stronger narrative. The inner voice becomes quieter and steadier, valuing presence over drama and long-term flourishing over short emotional relief. This work is not a singular triumph. It is ongoing craft. Identifying patterns, mapping responses, and enforcing limits becomes the architecture of life reclaimed. Power returns not as a triumphant shout, but as a daily accumulation of small, disciplined acts. The result is simple and profound: the ability to choose presence over reaction, and the steady recovery of personal power that follows. Number 2, reclaim energy from emotional drains. Energy is the quiet currency of life, yet so often it is spent unwittingly, drained by invisible leeches that sap the mind, the heart, and the body. Reclaiming energy begins with awareness, the ability to see where vitality is flowing and where it is leaking. Many people live in a reactive state, responding to demands, emotions, and crises that do not serve their growth, unaware that each moment of automatic engagement is a moment surrendered. The first step is to recognize that energy is not infinite, and that your responsibility is to allocate it wisely. Emotional drains are often subtle. They can be conversations that leave the chest heavy, interactions that bring tension to the shoulders, or relationships that demand constant attention without offering reciprocity. These drains are not always dramatic. Sometimes they manifest as fatigue, irritation, or a pervasive sense of depletion that follows routine contact with certain people or environments. Awareness requires honesty. Observe which interactions leave a residue of fatigue and which leave a residue of fulfillment. This distinction becomes the foundation for conscious energy management. Once identified, the second step is prioritization. Energy must be consciously directed toward what sustains, nourishes, and empowers. This requires difficult decisions, declining invitations, shortening conversations, or limiting contact with habitual complainers. Prioritization is not avoidance. It is strategic allocation. Treat energy like a resource that fuels the most important projects, relationships, and pursuits. Each choice to withhold energy from a drain creates space for focus, clarity, and emotional resilience. Boundaries and energy management intersect. Every limit set on time, attention, or involvement is a declaration of what is sacred. They are not barriers erected out of fear or judgment, but protective measures for personal vitality. Learn to recognize moments when engagement is optional versus necessary. Optional engagement with a drain is an opportunity for redirection. Necessary engagement must be structured to avoid complete depletion. Structuring involves preset durations, defined objectives, and exit strategies. Clear structure ensures that energy is not consumed without conscious choice. Internal dialogue plays a critical role. Thoughts like "I must respond immediately" or "I cannot disappoint them" are subtle energy siphons. Challenge these narratives by examining the consequences of non-immediate response or slight disappointment. Often the perceived obligation is heavier than reality. Replace compulsive compliance with intentional action. Respond with clarity, not compulsion, and measure interactions by the energy returned versus the energy spent. Ruminate after each interaction helps to refine this calibration. Mindful engagement is a powerful tool for energy reclamation. When present in a conversation or task, the mind and body are aligned, and energy is used efficiently. When distracted, reactive, or anxious, energy is scattered and quickly depleted. Practices, such as deep breathing, grounding exercises, or momentary pauses before responding, cultivate presence. Even small, consistent pauses allow the nervous system to stabilize and prevent emotional overdraw. Awareness of physical cues, tight shoulders, shallow breathing, restlessness, signals that energy is being consumed unnecessarily and offers an opportunity to reset before exhaustion takes hold. Reclaiming energy also involves deliberate withdrawal from repetitive negativity. Social media, news cycles, and environments heavy with complaints or criticism are notorious for energy drainage. Temporary abstention or reduced exposure is not escapism, it is preservation. Curate sources of information and influence that are constructive or neutral. Replace passive consumption with active cultivation, reading, creative projects, or reflective journaling. Redirecting attention from reactive consumption to proactive creation multiplies energy rather than diminishes it. Physical self-care is inseparable from emotional energy. Sleep, nutrition, movement, and hydration directly affect how much vitality is available to engage with the world. Neglect in these areas accelerates depletion and amplifies sensitivity to emotional drains. Energy reclamation is therefore holistic. It addresses body, mind, and emotions simultaneously. Exercise is not merely physical. It regulates mood, strengthens resilience, and creates a reservoir of stamina for facing unavoidable drains without collapse. Relationships demand special attention. Identify which connections consistently provide nourishment and which exact a toll. Nourishing relationships energize, draining relationships deplete. Evaluate involvement in each, not morally but practically. Communicate openly where possible. Express limits respectfully. Define expectations, and step back when reciprocity fails. Energy is returned when attention is given where it is valued and appreciated. In parallel, cultivate relationships that bring vitality. These act as natural energy sources, replenishing rather than extracting. Rituals of restoration are essential. Even short practices of solitude, reflection, or meditation restore depleted reserves. Daily micro-restoratives, such as 5 minutes of quiet breathing, a mindful cup of tea, or a brief walk outdoors, act as energy checkpoints. Longer periods of immersion in nature, extended creative sessions, or intentional solitude provide deeper recharge. Energy is a living force. It is maintained through rhythm, consistency, and respect for its natural ebb and flow. Mental reframing supports energy management. Events, interactions, or behaviors that once triggered frustration or anxiety can be viewed through a lens of observation and learning. Reframing does not dismiss feelings but translates them into insight. Instead of investing energy in resentment or helplessness, channel it toward understanding patterns, adjusting boundaries, and planning constructive responses. Energy spent in reflection and strategic action multiplies returns. Energy spent in reactive rumination evaporates without benefit. Accountability reinforces practice. Keep track of where energy is allocated and the impact of each engagement. Journaling moments of depletion versus replenishment creates a map of personal energy economics. Recognize small victories, declining a taxing invitation, enforcing a boundary, or redirecting attention from negativity are evidence of regained autonomy. Patterns emerge over time, guiding future decisions and preventing backsliding into unconscious depletion. Consistent reflection ensures that energy management becomes habitual rather than sporadic. Learning to reclaim energy is also about resilience in the face of unavoidable drains. Life presents circumstances beyond control, work crises, family conflicts, and global stressors. Reclamation does not mean withdrawal from necessary responsibilities, but managing personal investment within those responsibilities. Allocate energy in a sustainable way. Focus on solutions over complaints, actionable steps over speculation, and strategic intervention over impulsive reaction. Controlled energy deployment ensures effectiveness while minimizing personal cost. Finally, recognize the intrinsic link between energy and power. Emotional, mental, and physical energy is the foundation of personal sovereignty. The ability to choose engagement, sustain presence, and act with clarity stems from energy reserves. Each act of reclaiming energy strengthens autonomy, sharpens focus, and expands capacity to create, contribute, and live fully. Without careful attention, energy dissipates, leaving the individual reactive, exhausted, and vulnerable. With careful attention, energy becomes a tool of liberation, a source of resilience, and a medium through which personal power is exercised deliberately. The practice of reclaiming energy from emotional drains is ongoing, requiring vigilance, self-awareness, and disciplined action. It demands honesty in recognizing sources of depletion, courage in implementing boundaries, and commitment to replenishment. Over time, the habitual allocation of energy toward the productive, the nourishing, and the empowering transforms the inner landscape. Life becomes less reactive and more intentional. Relationships are chosen and nurtured rather than endured. Every action carries weight because it is invested, not squandered. The cumulative effect is profound. A life conducted with agency, vitality, and clarity, where energy is reclaimed, preserved, and amplified, and where power is not taken from external validation, but reclaimed from the disciplined stewardship of the self. Number 3. Observe feelings without immediate reaction. Emotions arrive uninvited, often with the force of a storm, and yet they are not commands. They are signals, not mandates. Observing feelings without immediate reaction is the art of cultivating inner space between sensation and action, the place where choice, clarity, and self-mastery reside. Most people act as though emotions are instructions, responding instantly to irritation, fear, or excitement, and in doing so they surrender power to the temporary surge of the moment. Learning to witness emotions without being swept away restores agency and builds resilience. The first step in this practice is recognition. When a feeling arises, acknowledge it fully, naming it with precision. Anger, frustration, disappointment, anxiety, joy, or sadness. Each has its texture, intensity, and signature. Attention to detail matters. A tightening in the chest, a churning in the stomach, a sudden heat in the face, or a tremor in the hands signals a specific emotional response. Observing these manifestations without judgment allows you to understand the body's language, which is often the most honest indicator of emotional state. Simply noticing that a reaction is occurring changes the relationship with it. The emotion becomes an object of observation rather than a dictator of action. The second layer is detachment. Detachment is not suppression or denial. It is the practice of seeing a feeling as a temporary event, passing through consciousness, like clouds drifting across the sky. The clouds may be dark and threatening, but they do not define the sky itself. Likewise, emotions, however intense, do not define your character or worth. Detachment involves cultivating the perspective that I am aware of this feeling, yet I am not the feeling. Repetition of this perspective gradually strengthens the mind's ability to resist impulsive reactions and reduces the habitual over-identification with fleeting states. Timing is essential. Immediate reactions often arise from habit loops formed over years. These loops are reinforced by repetition. A sharp word provokes defensiveness, irritation triggers sarcasm, or fear leads to avoidance. Observing without reacting introduces a pause. Small at first, perhaps a second or two, then expanding as the practice deepens. In this pause lies the opportunity for choice. The pause does not weaken the intensity of the emotion. Rather, it positions the individual to respond in alignment with values, goals, and long-term well-being, rather than immediate gratification or reflexive release. Practical exercises solidify this skill. Begin with daily check-ins. Throughout the day, pause periodically and scan for any arising emotions. Label them silently, noting intensity and bodily sensations. If irritation surfaces, observe it. This is irritation. I feel heat in my chest, tension in my shoulders. Then allow the emotion to exist without acting on it. Over time, these mini observations create neural pathways that strengthen awareness, making automatic reactivity less likely. Journaling is another powerful method. Writing down emotional experiences without commentary or attempted resolution allows for reflection. The act of translating feelings into words externalizes them, making them less overwhelming. Over days and weeks, patterns emerge, identifying triggers, habitual responses, and recurring scenarios that provoke emotional escalation. Awareness of these patterns enables anticipation, preparation, and the conscious selection of a more effective response when similar situations arise in the future. Breathing techniques enhance observation. Deep, rhythmic breaths serve as anchors, preventing the mind from spiraling into immediate action. Each inhale grounds attention in the present, while each exhale signals the nervous system that immediate reaction is optional. Pairing breath with labeling: inhale, noticing anger; exhale, observing without reacting, reinforces the association between sensation, awareness, and deliberate choice. Breath becomes a bridge between emotion and mindful response, a tool for regulating intensity and preserving composure. Visualization can further support the process. Imagine the emotion as a river flowing through a valley. The river may surge and tumble, but the valley itself remains unchanged. Position yourself as the observer on the riverbank, noticing the currents, eddies, and debris, without attempting to control the flow. This imagery trains the mind to witness intensity without being swept away, cultivating an inner refuge where reactions can be chosen rather than compelled. Repetition under challenge is crucial. It is not sufficient to practice observation in calm moments. The skill must extend to high-intensity situations where habitual reaction is strongest. During conflict, disappointment, or perceived offense, pause deliberately. Name the emotion, note the physical sensations, breathe and allow the space for a reasoned response. Initially, this may feel uncomfortable or counterintuitive, but consistency develops tolerance for emotional intensity and builds the capacity to act in accordance with personal principles rather than external provocation. Self-reflection after the event reinforces learning. Examine how observing without immediate reaction influenced outcomes. Did the pause prevent escalation? Did it allow for more constructive communication? Did it reduce regret or remorse later? Reflecting without self-criticism strengthens confidence and encourages continued application. It emphasizes the idea that mastery of emotion is a skill, developed incrementally through conscious practice, rather than innate perfection. Social context plays a role in reinforcing the habit. When possible, engage with individuals who respect personal composure and practice measured responses. Surrounding oneself with a calm, mindful environment reduces pressure to react impulsively and provides models for emotional observation. Conversely, consistently engaging in chaotic or manipulative contexts without practiced observation can erode skill, making deliberate pauses more challenging. Strategic selection of social environments reinforces the internal work. The long-term benefits extend beyond self-control. Observing emotions without immediate reaction cultivates clarity, empathy, and insight. When not overwhelmed by the tide of feeling, one can listen more deeply, make decisions aligned with values, and respond in ways that strengthen relationships and personal goals. Emotional intelligence is enhanced as awareness of internal states naturally extends to the recognition of patterns in others. Power is reclaimed not through dominance over others, but through mastery of self. Energy conservation is a direct consequence. Each moment spent reacting impulsively drains reserves that could otherwise be invested in purposeful action, creativity, and meaningful engagement. By learning to observe first, energy is preserved, and decisions become strategic rather than reactive. Emotional regulation reduces stress, enhances mental clarity, and supports physical health, creating a compound effect. The more energy retained, the more effective the individual becomes in every domain of life. Observation without immediate reaction fosters resilience. Life is unpredictable, and emotional turbulence is inevitable. Developing the capacity to witness without reacting creates a foundation that remains stable despite external chaos. Emotional storms may arrive, but the observer remains grounded, able to navigate difficulties with reason, composure, and a sense of agency. Over time, resilience becomes not a temporary state, but a default posture, empowering the individual to face challenges with courage and poise. The culmination of this practice is freedom. Freedom from being hijacked by circumstance, freedom from compulsive response, and freedom to choose engagement deliberately. Observing feelings without immediate reaction is not passive. It is the active cultivation of sovereignty over one's internal landscape. Each pause, each breath, each moment of recognition strengthens the mind's capacity to act from clarity rather than reflex, transforming emotional turbulence into a tool for growth, understanding, and intentional action. The skill becomes a lens through which life is experienced with greater depth, balance, and power, where every feeling is acknowledged, understood, and integrated without compromising the calm and focus of the self. Number 4, practice self-compassion daily, unapologetically. Self-compassion is not indulgence. It is a deliberate, courageous act of recognizing your own humanity and treating yourself with the care that would be offered to someone you deeply value. Many people move through life with an unrelenting internal critic, measuring themselves by impossible standards and punishing every perceived failure. The constant internal judgment erodes confidence, drains energy, and blocks growth. Practicing self-compassion daily, unapologetically, is the conscious choice to reclaim the mind from tyranny, to nurture resilience, and to create a foundation for sustainable personal power. The first step is recognition. Observe the tone of your inner dialogue. Notice when it is harsh, unforgiving, or demanding perfection. Awareness alone is transformative because it shifts the inner critic from being an unquestioned authority to a pattern that can be challenged. Recognize that criticism, while sometimes rooted in protection or habit, often exaggerates faults and minimizes successes. Naming the inner voice allows it to be seen as separate from your essential self, which is capable, valuable, and worthy of care. Daily self-compassion begins with simple gestures that acknowledge your own efforts. When mistakes occur, instead of judgment, offer understanding. Instead of harshness, offer encouragement. For instance, after a difficult day, rather than berating yourself for inefficiencies, reflect, "I did my best under the circumstances, and I will continue learning." This practice transforms failure from a source of shame into an opportunity for growth. Words matter. They are the medium through which the mind internalizes kindness or cruelty. Speaking gently to yourself rewires thought patterns and cultivates a steady, supportive inner voice. Self-compassion is anchored in acceptance of imperfection. Recognize that struggle, mistakes, and setbacks are intrinsic to the human experience. Attempting to eliminate imperfection is both futile and exhausting. Embrace flaws as teachers rather than enemies. Each challenge endured, each error confronted, is evidence of courage and engagement with life. By allowing yourself to be human without apology, the energy otherwise consumed by self-punishment is redirected toward constructive action and personal growth. Practical routines reinforce this mindset. Start the day with an affirmation grounded in reality, not fantasy. "I will treat myself with patience and clarity today." Simple repetitions anchor intention. Throughout the day, pause at regular intervals to check in on your emotional and mental state. Notice tension, fatigue, or self-critical thoughts. Respond to these observations with compassion, not avoidance. This regular practice strengthens the neural pathways associated with supportive self-talk, gradually transforming automatic reactions into deliberate, nurturing responses. Physical self-care amplifies self-compassion. Rest, nutrition, and movement are signals to the body and mind that your well-being matters. Treat these practices not as obligations, but as acts of respect toward yourself. Prioritizing recovery and energy replenishment is not selfish. It is foundational for maintaining resilience, focus, and emotional equilibrium. When the body is nourished and rested, the mind can engage in reflection, discipline, and creativity more effectively. Boundaries are a form of self-compassion as well. By protecting your time, energy, and emotional space, you honor your own needs without shame or guilt. Saying no to excessive demands or toxic interactions is not rejection of others. It is an assertion of self-worth. Each boundary established reinforces the principle that your well-being is not negotiable, creating a structure in which self-compassion can thrive consistently rather than sporadically. Self-compassion also involves forgiveness. Forgive yourself for past missteps, choices made from ignorance, or decisions driven by fear. Carrying resentment toward oneself for mistakes is a silent drain on energy, confidence, and clarity. Forgiveness does not erase responsibility, but frees the mind to act with greater wisdom. Acknowledging error with understanding and moving forward strengthens character, cultivates humility, and enhances the capacity to navigate future challenges with grace. Daily practices of gratitude intertwine naturally with self-compassion. Recognize not only what is happening externally but also what you contribute and endure internally. Reflect on moments of perseverance, decisions made with integrity, or personal growth that is less visible but deeply significant. Gratitude shifts focus from deficiency to sufficiency, from criticism to acknowledgement. By appreciating your own journey, You cultivate a sustained sense of worthiness that supports confidence, resilience, and intentional action. Mindfulness exercises extend the practice. When difficult emotions or stressors arise, observe them without judgment. Label the emotion, feel its presence fully, and then allow it to pass without attaching a narrative of failure or inadequacy. Recognize that emotional turbulence does not diminish value or capacity. Mindfulness combined with self-compassion forms a stabilizing feedback loop. The ability to witness experience without judgment reinforces acceptance, and acceptance deepens resilience against future emotional disturbance. Self-compassion is unapologetic when it is consistent and visible in action. It is not hidden behind excuses or justification. It is a clear statement that your well-being is a priority. This may challenge ingrained societal norms that equate self-care with weakness or selfishness. By practicing it openly, you redefine standards for your own life. Daily demonstrations of care toward oneself, pausing when tired, speaking kindly during mistakes, maintaining personal rituals, serve as a declaration that self-respect is non-negotiable. Reflection consolidates progress. At the end of each day, review moments where self-compassion was practiced and moments where the inner critic dominated. Observe without harsh judgment. Each observation is data for refinement, a blueprint for growth. Celebrate even the smallest acts of kindness toward oneself, as these accumulate into an enduring capacity for resilience, clarity, and agency. Recognize that mastery of self-compassion is gradual, strengthened incrementally through repetition, attention, and intention. The impact of practicing self-compassion daily extends beyond the individual. By nurturing a stable, resilient, and grounded inner self, interactions with others become less reactive and more authentic. Decision-making improves because it is less clouded by fear, guilt, or shame. Energy is preserved rather than dissipated through internal conflict, allowing focus and creativity to flourish. Compassion for oneself naturally radiates outward, creating the capacity to empathize, support, and guide without depletion. Cultivating self-compassion unapologetically is a lifelong commitment, demanding consistency, reflection, and courage. It challenges ingrained patterns of self-criticism and societal messaging that equate worth with achievement or perfection. The reward is profound, an inner sanctuary of support, resilience, and clarity that sustains engagement with the world without surrendering power. Each day of deliberate self-kindness is a brick in the foundation of personal sovereignty, enabling a life of purpose, intentionality, and quiet confidence. Number 5. Replace dependency with personal accountability. Dependence on others often masquerades as necessity or convenience, but in reality it quietly erodes autonomy, confidence, and the power to shape one's own life. Many people fall into routines of seeking approval, guidance, or support to the point where their decisions, actions, and sense of worth are tethered to external forces. Replacing dependency with personal accountability is a deliberate reclamation of agency, a commitment to stand firmly on one's own judgment and choices, and a recognition that life responds to responsibility rather than expectation. The first step toward accountability is honest self-assessment. Examine areas of life where reliance on others dictates outcomes. Identify moments when decisions are postponed until validation is received, when emotions are contingent on approval, or when productivity hinges on permission. These are subtle forms of surrender that often feel normal but limit growth. Acknowledging these patterns requires courage, because it exposes the gap between current habits and desired independence. This awareness is not a tool for self-criticism but a starting point for transformation. Accountability begins with ownership of decisions. Every choice, large or small, carries consequences, and the mature individual recognizes that externalizing responsibility diminishes power. Taking full responsibility means accepting success and failure alike, without blaming circumstances, other people, or past mistakes. This practice cultivates clarity, sharpens judgment, and strengthens resilience. The act of owning one's actions is a declaration of sovereignty, signaling that control over life resides within rather than in the hands of others. Practical implementation involves setting clear goals with defined responsibilities. When objectives are explicit, the pathway for action becomes concrete, and reliance on external prompts diminishes. Break down larger ambitions into manageable steps, assigning ownership of each component to oneself. Measure progress through tangible markers rather than external affirmation. This habit creates a feedback loop of self-reliance. Completion reinforces competence, and competence fuels confidence, gradually reducing the subconscious need for guidance or validation from others. Decision-making skills develop naturally when accountability replaces dependency. Begin with minor choices, selecting tasks, organizing schedules, or resolving conflicts independently. Evaluate outcomes based on personal standards and lessons learned rather than approval received. As confidence in judgment grows, the capacity to handle more complex decisions expands. Repeated practice strengthens trust in one's intuition, analytical ability, and problem-solving skills. The cumulative effect is a self-directed life, free from the constant influence of others' expectations. Boundaries support the transition from dependency to accountability. By defining limits on interference, advice, and unsolicited guidance, energy is redirected towards self-directed action. Politely but firmly limit involvement of others in areas where independent decision-making is necessary. This creates a protective framework in which mistakes are self-contained learning experiences, rather than communal dramas. Boundaries reinforce the principle that the individual is responsible for the outcomes of their actions, not observers or bystanders. Mindset is critical. Replace thoughts of helplessness with constructive language, emphasizing control and capacity. I am responsible for this outcome. I have the tools to act decisively, or I will manage what I can influence. These phrases are not empty affirmations. They are mental scaffolds that gradually rewire the automatic impulse to defer to others. Internal dialogue becomes a reinforcement of agency, replacing anxiety-driven reliance with confidence in personal competence. Accountability demands consistency. Sporadic self-reliance reinforces dependency by creating oscillating patterns of action and deferment. Establish daily routines in which responsibilities are claimed and executed independently. Track progress objectively, noting instances where independent decision-making produced results and areas where reliance crept back in. Reflection is not punitive but informative, providing insight into how dependency manifests and how it can be replaced systematically over time. Emotional accountability is as important as practical responsibility. Avoid placing the burden of emotional regulation on others. Learn to identify feelings, understand their origins, and respond to them constructively, without seeking constant reassurance or validation. Emotional self-management preserves mental energy, reduces vulnerability to manipulation, and strengthens resilience. By owning emotional responses, the individual creates a stable platform from which external challenges can be met with calm, clarity, and reasoned action. Learning from failure is central to personal accountability. Dependence often arises from fear of making mistakes, leading to avoidance or over-reliance on guidance. Embrace errors as necessary feedback, not as evidence of inadequacy. Analyze the outcome objectively: what worked, what did not, and what adjustment is required. Implement corrective action independently. Over time, repeated cycles of self-directed problem-solving replace fear with confidence, cultivating a mindset that treats challenges as opportunities for skill development, rather than threats requiring external rescue. Accountability strengthens relationships. When reliance is minimized, interactions shift from codependent dynamics to authentic engagement. Support is requested thoughtfully, not automatically assumed, and assistance is valued rather than expected. This recalibration enhances mutual respect and reduces friction caused by perceived burdens or unbalanced contributions. Independence does not equate to isolation. It creates space for collaboration built on choice, competence, and mutual benefit, rather than necessity or obligation. The environment plays a supporting role. Surround yourself with structures, tools, and resources that enable self-directed action. Use planners, reminders, or task management systems to reduce dependency on verbal cues or constant oversight. Organize spaces to facilitate independent workflow. Over time, these systems reinforce habits of ownership and reduce opportunities for reliance on external guidance. Environment becomes an ally in the cultivation of accountability. Visualization and reflection amplify the process. Envision the desired state of self-directed living and compare it against current habits. Map decisions, actions, and outcomes where independence has been successfully exercised. Celebrate moments of autonomous action, reinforcing the behavior neurologically and psychologically. Reflection transforms abstract intention into concrete awareness, strengthening the internal drive to remain accountable regardless of external influence. Personal accountability is an ongoing practice. Life continuously presents circumstances that challenge independence. Unforeseen obstacles, interpersonal conflict, or internal doubts. Each scenario is a training ground for reinforcing responsibility. By consciously choosing action aligned with one's own judgment and values, autonomy is strengthened incrementally. The habit of self-reliance solidifies through repetition, reflection, and mindful engagement, creating a resilient foundation upon which life's complexities can be navigated with composure and clarity. Ultimately, replacing dependency with personal accountability restores power. Decisions, successes, failures, and growth become products of intentional action rather than the whims or permissions of others. Energy is preserved because it is invested, not spent compensating for inaction or reliance. Confidence grows, resilience deepens, and life becomes an arena of deliberate influence rather than passive reaction. Through consistent practice, the individual transforms into a self-governing agent, capable of navigating challenges, achieving goals, and exercising authority over their own destiny with unwavering clarity and strength. Number 6. Shift focus towards self-empowerment. True empowerment begins within. It is not granted by others, nor does it arrive through external circumstances. Shifting focus towards self-empowerment is the conscious decision to invest energy, time, and intention into developing the internal resources necessary to navigate life with autonomy, clarity, and resilience. Many people look outward for validation, authority, or influence, yet lasting power is cultivated through deliberate attention to one's own capabilities, choices, and mindset. This internal orientation changes the way the world is experienced. It transforms reactive living into deliberate, directed action. The first step in self-empowerment is understanding that external events are not the source of personal authority. Challenges, setbacks, and opinions of others are inevitable, but they only have the power that is granted to them by perception and response. Shifting focus requires the conscious decision to locate influence within, recognizing that the capacity to choose reactions, set priorities, and act intentionally is the true seat of control. This perspective fosters mental clarity and reduces the habitual surrender of energy to circumstances beyond control. A central component of empowerment is developing self-awareness. Observe thought patterns, habitual behaviors, and emotional responses. Identify areas where energy is surrendered unnecessarily, where decisions are deferred, or where personal power is diluted through approval seeking. Awareness is not judgmental but diagnostic. It reveals the precise points where attention and intention must be directed. By mapping these areas, it becomes possible to intervene deliberately, redirecting effort toward personal growth rather than external distraction. Self-empowerment demands skill cultivation. Strengthening knowledge, abilities, and resilience enhances confidence and broadens the range of options available in any scenario. Skills can be practical, intellectual, emotional, or interpersonal, but each contributes to a deeper sense of autonomy. Learning a new competency or refining an existing talent demonstrates tangible control over life's outcomes. The act of mastering something cultivates belief in one's capacity to influence circumstances rather than be overwhelmed by them. Decision-making is a crucial area for empowerment. Practice evaluating situations independently, assessing potential outcomes, and acting based on internal criteria rather than external pressure. Avoid deferring to others out of habit or fear. Each conscious, self-directed choice reinforces the internal locus of control, strengthening confidence and diminishing dependency. The consistent practice of deliberate action accumulates, creating a framework of experience from which intuitive and analytical judgment can emerge reliably. Emotional regulation is another pillar. Empowerment is undermined when feelings dictate behavior. Observing emotions without surrendering to them preserves energy and enhances strategic action. Cultivate the ability to recognize emotional responses, understand their origin, and act intentionally. Emotional discipline allows for presence, reasoned judgment, and resilience under stress. It converts volatile reactions into measured responses, which is an essential aspect of maintaining personal authority and focus. Physical well-being supports empowerment. Energy, clarity, and resilience are amplified when the body is nourished, rested, and exercised regularly. Neglecting physical needs weakens mental acuity, emotional balance, and stamina, making it easier to succumb to external pressures. Daily attention to movement, nutrition, and rest is an investment in the resources required to act effectively. A strong, well-cared-for body provides a foundation from which personal influence can be exercised consistently and confidently. Mindset plays a transformative role. Self-empowerment requires replacing limiting beliefs with constructive narratives that reinforce capability, autonomy, and growth. Thoughts such as, "I cannot manage this," or "I need permission," must be replaced with statements that affirm responsibility, readiness, and agency. Mental reframing strengthens the sense of possibility and reduces susceptibility to disempowering external influence. The mind becomes a tool for creation, strategy, and measured action, rather than a reactive conduit for circumstance. Goal setting amplifies empowerment. Define clear objectives and outline steps to achieve them. Establish metrics to track progress and adjust strategies as necessary. Goals provide focus and direction, converting abstract intentions into actionable plans. By pursuing objectives independently, accountability is internalized, fostering ownership over success and failure alike. The pursuit of self-defined goals shifts energy from responding to external demands toward the proactive creation of desired outcomes. Reflection and evaluation are essential. Regularly assess decisions, behaviors, and outcomes to understand what strategies enhance influence and which patterns undermine it. Reflection without self-criticism identifies actionable insights and promotes iterative growth. The feedback loop generated by deliberate evaluation strengthens competence and consolidates the sense of internal authority. Lessons learned from reflection become tools for greater autonomy in future situations. Relationships intersect with empowerment when approached consciously. Choose interactions that reinforce autonomy rather than undermine it. Surround yourself with individuals who support growth and provide constructive feedback, rather than those who demand compliance or diminish confidence. Strategic engagement preserves energy, reinforces self-efficacy, and fosters mutual respect. Interpersonal dynamics, when navigated from a position of internal authority, become collaborative rather than controlling or draining. Time management reinforces empowerment. Allocate attention deliberately to high-value activities that build competence, resilience, and well-being. Avoid overcommitting to obligations that dilute focus or surrender control. Each decision to direct time towards self-enhancing pursuits strengthens autonomy and ensures energy is applied where it produces the most impact. Efficient use of time converts intention into measurable outcomes, solidifying personal influence over circumstances. Persistence is necessary because the path to self-empowerment is continuous and often challenged by internal doubts and external obstacles. Daily practice in self-directed action, emotional regulation, and conscious reflection strengthens resilience. Challenges are reframed as opportunities to reinforce autonomy and practice decisive action. The cumulative effect of consistent effort is an enduring sense of control, self-trust, and capability that withstands setbacks without erosion. Visualization and mental rehearsal further enhance self-empowerment. Imagine handling difficult situations with poise, making choices aligned with values, and navigating conflict effectively. Mental rehearsal strengthens neural pathways, builds confidence, and reduces hesitation when action is required. Preparedness through imagination translates into real-world composure and strategic response, reinforcing the capacity to act independently and with authority. Empowerment also involves intentional consumption. Media, information, and social influences shape perception, emotion, and thought. Curate sources to ensure they support growth, clarity, and resilience, rather than creating distraction, dependency, or fear. Protect attention as a resource. Guard against overexposure to negativity, manipulation, or unconstructive influence. The energy preserved through selective engagement strengthens autonomy and ensures focus is applied to personally meaningful endeavors. Self-empowerment creates a compounding effect. Each act of deliberate choice, skill development, emotional mastery, and reflective practice reinforces the sense of control, competence, and purpose. The internal locus of power expands, reducing susceptibility to manipulation, external pressure, and reactive behavior. Life becomes a series of deliberate actions rather than a collection of uncontrollable events. Confidence, resilience, and clarity emerge naturally from consistent application of focused effort, independent action, and conscious intention. Ultimately, shifting focus towards self-empowerment is a lifelong commitment to intentional living. It requires vigilance, self-awareness, and the discipline to prioritize personal growth, decision-making, and energy management over passive reaction. As attention is directed inward, autonomy is strengthened, personal resources are optimized, and influence is exercised from a position of clarity and competence. Through consistent practice, the individual transforms into a proactive agent capable of navigating complexity, pursuing goals, and engaging with the world from a place of grounded authority and enduring self-trust. Number 7. Detach from outcomes. Embrace freedom. True freedom arises when the mind is unshackled from the compulsion to control outcomes. Most people tether their sense of worth, security, and happiness to results, whether it's success at work, approval from others, or the unfolding of life according to expectation. This attachment to outcomes is a silent chain, dictating behavior, stirring anxiety, and creating relentless pressure. Detaching from outcomes does not mean abandoning ambition or effort. It means investing energy and action while releasing the illusion that the final result determines value or identity. When detachment is practiced consistently, freedom emerges, not as a distant ideal, but as a lived experience in each choice, moment, and interaction. The first step is redefining effort. Effort is the domain of control. Outcomes are influenced by countless variables beyond immediate influence. When energy is focused on the quality of action rather than the guarantee of results, productivity becomes sustainable, creativity flourishes, and stress diminishes. The paradox is that mastery and success often emerge more reliably when attention is given to what can be controlled rather than obsessing over what cannot. This mindset shifts the locus of power inward, restoring autonomy in the midst of uncertainty. Observation is essential. Notice the emotional responses triggered by anticipated outcomes: anxiety, fear, overplanning, or obsession with approval. These reactions reveal where attachment exists and where energy is misallocated. Documenting instances when the mind becomes entangled in expectation provides a clear map of habitual control-seeking behavior. Awareness alone reduces compulsive reactivity, allowing space for conscious redirection toward meaningful engagement with the present moment. Commitment to action without attachment is a skill built gradually. Start with small decisions and tasks. Complete them with integrity and focus, but consciously release mental insistence on the result. For instance, finish a report thoroughly without obsessing over praise or recognition. Exercise creativity without clinging to validation. Over time, this repeated practice rewires neural pathways, reinforcing the distinction between effort and outcome, action and attachment. The more frequently this is practiced, the more instinctive it becomes. Mental reframing supports detachment. Outcomes are not moral indicators of worth, intelligence, or capability. A project not accepted, a goal unmet, or a relationship that evolves differently than hoped is not evidence of failure, but an event to be navigated. Reframe results as feedback, data points from which to learn and adapt, rather than as verdicts on character. This cognitive shift reduces fear, preserves emotional energy, and encourages ongoing effort without paralysis from expectation. Expectation often breeds resistance. The mind fixates on preferred outcomes, creating anxiety over possibilities that may never occur. Detachment dissolves this fixation. Visualize multiple possible results for any situation, recognizing that life's flow is inherently unpredictable. By accepting uncertainty as natural, the mind becomes flexible rather than rigid, and decisions are made with clarity rather than coercion by imagined consequences. This fluidity allows freedom to act effectively even under complex or shifting conditions. Rituals of release are practical tools. Before undertaking important tasks, pause to acknowledge the limits of control. Affirm the commitment to act with focus and integrity, and mentally let go of attachment to result. Simple phrases, meditative breaths, or short reflection exercises reinforce this habit. Over time, ritualized release conditions the nervous system to respond with calm and clarity instead of tension and desperation, preserving energy for action rather than worry. Decision-making benefits from detachment. When choices are made with focus on alignment with values, skills, and immediate goals, rather than predicted reactions or imagined judgments, the process becomes clearer and more intentional. Choices emerge from competence and clarity, not fear of loss or desire for approval. Over time, habitual detachment strengthens judgment, intuition, and confidence, making each action both deliberate and free. Relationships illustrate the power of detachment. Interactions often carry unspoken expectations for affection, agreement, or validation. These expectations are subtle but potent forms of attachment. Practicing presence in relationships, engaging fully without seeking specific reactions or outcomes, transforms interaction. Responses from others are received as information, not validation or condemnation. This approach fosters authentic connection while preserving autonomy, reducing the emotional cost of dependency on approval or control. Failure and disappointment are inevitable, but detachment transforms their impact. Viewed as events to process and learn from, they no longer trigger existential threat or compulsive attempts at control. Emotional resilience grows because attachment to specific results no longer dictates self-perception or peace of mind. The ability to absorb setbacks without collapse strengthens confidence and maintains clarity in pursuing subsequent action. Each encounter with unmet expectation becomes practice in freedom, reinforcing the principle that life's value is independent of transient outcomes. Time management is enhanced through detachment. When focus is placed on consistent, purposeful effort rather than obsessively steering toward a particular result, tasks are approached with calm efficiency. Energy is preserved for effortful engagement rather than wasted on anxiety about consequences. Productivity is maintained, creativity flourishes, and mental clarity increases, demonstrating that detachment is not passivity, but strategic allocation of focus and attention. Visualization further strengthens the habit of releasing outcomes. Imagine approaching tasks with full presence, completing them thoroughly, and then observing whatever result arises with equanimity. Picture yourself responding to unexpected outcomes with curiosity rather than fear or frustration. These mental exercises build neural familiarity with freedom from attachment, making the practice more instinctive in real-world situations. Detachment becomes an embodied skill rather than a conceptual idea. Physical grounding complements mental practice. Body awareness supports the release of tension tied to attachment. Muscle relaxation, deep breathing, or movement rituals signal to the nervous system that control over outcomes is optional. Physical anchoring reinforces mental release, allowing the mind to remain calm and focused despite external uncertainty. The body and mind become aligned in the practice of action with detachment, amplifying presence and resilience. Reflection consolidates learning. At the end of each day or project, review where attachment influenced effort, energy, or emotion. Note instances where release allowed clarity, reduced stress, or improved effectiveness. Identify situations where attachment reemerged and consider adjustments for future practice. Reflection is not self-judgment. It is feedback that guides refinement, deepening the skill of detachment over time. Each cycle strengthens the capacity to act freely, independently, and intentionally. The ultimate benefit of detachment from outcomes is liberation. Actions become expressions of skill, judgment, and intention, rather than instruments of control. Energy is no longer diverted into anxiety, fear, or compulsion, but is concentrated on purposeful engagement. Emotional freedom expands as identity is no longer dependent on success or failure. Life is experienced moment by moment, fully, with agency intact, regardless of the ever-changing result. True power emerges from this freedom, the ability to act, create, and engage without being imprisoned by expectation. By embracing detachment, the mind discovers a new rhythm, effort with focus, presence without compulsion, and participation in life unbound by the chains of outcomes. Number 8. Limit exposure to negative influences. Negative influences are subtle yet powerful forces that infiltrate life, shaping thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in ways that drain energy and limit potential. They are not always obvious. Sometimes they appear as persistent pessimism, criticism disguised as advice, social media content that triggers anxiety, or habitual patterns of complaining in relationships. Exposure to such influences erodes mental clarity, diminishes motivation, and subtly shifts focus away from personal growth. Limiting this exposure is a deliberate act of self-preservation, a conscious effort to safeguard the mind and spirit, and a prerequisite for sustained empowerment and peace. The first step is awareness. Observe the sources in your life that consistently induce stress, doubt, or emotional turbulence. These may be specific individuals, certain social circles, or recurring media consumption. Recognize patterns. After interacting with particular people or environments, how do you feel? Are you uplifted, energized, and motivated, or drained, anxious, and uncertain? Document these experiences objectively. Awareness lays the foundation for intentional action, turning vague discomfort into actionable insight that informs boundaries and choices. Boundaries are essential in limiting negative exposure. Once sources are identified, create intentional limits around engagement. This may involve reducing time spent with individuals who are habitually critical or manipulative, unfollowing social media channels that provoke anxiety, or declining invitations to environments that foster tension or distraction. Boundaries are not punitive. They are protective measures that preserve mental and emotional resources. By controlling input, focus is shifted toward nourishing influences rather than reactive consumption of negativity. Environment plays a critical role. Physical spaces, routines, and digital surroundings shape mental states. Curate your environment intentionally. Maintain clean, organized, and stimulating spaces. Minimize clutter that promotes stress. Design routines that reinforce clarity and presence. Digital consumption requires equal attention. Unsubscribe from content that provokes fear, anger, or distraction. The mind responds to repeated inputs, so shaping the environment proactively enhances resilience, focus, and well-being, while reducing the subtle but cumulative impact of negative influence. Selective interaction is another strategy. Surrounding yourself with constructive voices amplifies growth and reduces susceptibility to disempowerment. Seek individuals who inspire, challenge thoughtfully, and model resilience. Constructive influence does not mean constant agreement or comfort. It is the presence of perspectives that encourage learning, reflection, and personal accountability. By choosing whom to engage with and how, energy is invested where it produces growth rather than depletion. Positive interactions provide support while reinforcing autonomy and self-trust. Awareness of internalized negativity is equally important. Not all influence comes from external sources. Patterns of self-criticism, doubt, and internalized voices from past experiences operate like persistent background noise. Limiting negative influence includes cultivating internal dialogue that reinforces empowerment, clarity, and purpose. Replace habitual self-sabotage with deliberate affirmations, reflection, and constructive critique. This internal alignment amplifies the effect of external boundary setting, creating a coherent strategy for mental and emotional preservation. Rituals of cleansing and renewal support this practice. Daily reflection, journaling, meditation, or brief moments of solitude act as mental resets, removing accumulated tension and mental clutter. Engage in activities that replenish rather than deplete energy. Reading insightful material, physical exercise, creative expression, or connecting with uplifting individuals. These rituals are intentional counterbalances to exposure, providing space for thought, clarity, and strategic decision-making, while reinforcing resilience against external negativity. Media and information consumption are particularly potent sources of influence. Constant exposure to news cycles, social media debates, and sensationalized content triggers stress, anxiety, and reactive thinking. Limit engagement by scheduling specific, intentional consumption windows and curating sources for reliability and constructive value. Avoid passive scrolling or habitual engagement that erodes focus. The mind operates as an ecosystem, absorbing input continuously. Careful management of information sustains energy, clarity, and the ability to act decisively. Communication style also shapes exposure. Engage consciously in conversations, steering away from gossip, judgment, and conflict-driven discussion when possible. Redirect interactions toward constructive problem-solving, collaborative thinking, or neutral topics that do not amplify stress. By controlling not only who is engaged with, but also how interactions unfold, exposure to negativity is minimized, and focus remains on productive, growth-oriented engagement. Accountability and reflection reinforce sustainable limits. Periodically review interactions, media consumption, and environments to assess their impact. Note where negative influence has crept in unnoticed, and adjust boundaries accordingly. Celebrate moments when engagement is consciously managed, energy is preserved, and focus remains aligned with personal priorities. Over time, these habits cultivate a keen sensitivity to influence and an intuitive ability to protect mental and emotional integrity proactively. Limiting exposure is not synonymous with avoidance or isolation. It is a strategic act of prioritization, preserving mental bandwidth for activities, relationships, and experiences that promote growth, resilience, and clarity. It allows freedom to choose responses rather than reacting impulsively to toxic energy. The practice strengthens self-efficacy, providing evidence that one can shape both environment and attention deliberately, rather than being at the mercy of external forces. Physical and emotional cues signal when exposure is excessive. Fatigue, irritability, tension, or recurring negative thought cycles indicate infiltration by draining influences. Attending to these cues enables timely intervention, stepping back, adjusting boundaries, or redirecting attention. The body often signals what the mind may overlook, providing a practical guide to maintaining equilibrium and autonomy in the face of potential stressors. Long-term benefits are profound. Limiting negative influence cultivates mental clarity, emotional stability, and sustainable energy for personal priorities. Decision-making improves, relationships become more balanced, and creative focus is enhanced. By selectively filtering external input, the individual gains the freedom to act intentionally, the confidence to trust judgment, and the resilience to navigate challenges without depletion. Energy once spent managing reactive responses is redirected toward growth, mastery, and meaningful action. Ultimately, the practice of limiting exposure to negativity is a statement of self-respect. It affirms that mental, emotional, and physical resources are sacred and deserve protection. Each boundary set, each choice of interaction, and each intentional curation of input reinforces autonomy and preserves the capacity for focused action. The individual gradually constructs a life in which influence is conscious, energy is allocated strategically, and freedom from unnecessary mental and emotional interference becomes the default state. Through consistent attention to what is allowed to enter the mind, clarity, resilience, and personal power expand, creating a sustainable platform for growth, effectiveness, and peace. Number 9. Strengthen inner voice, quiet external. The inner voice is the compass of personal direction, the quiet guidance that emerges when clarity, self-awareness, and purpose align. Strengthening this voice while quieting external noise is essential for reclaiming authority over life, making decisions with confidence, and acting in alignment with one's values. In a world saturated with opinions, expectations, and constant stimuli, it is easy to surrender attention to external voices, whether from others' judgments, media, or social pressures. This constant interference dilutes intuition, undermines confidence, and perpetuates indecision. Cultivating a strong inner voice requires intentional focus, disciplined reflection, and consistent practice in prioritizing internal guidance over external clamor. The first step is creating space for the inner voice to be heard. Silence is the canvas upon which clarity emerges. Begin by setting aside dedicated moments each day to disconnect from the noise of the world. Turn off devices, withdraw from social media, and step away from environments saturated with external input. These moments can be brief, a few minutes of deep reflection, a quiet walk, or mindful breathing, but they provide the necessary stillness for the mind to attune to intuition, insight, and values. In these pockets of calm, the inner voice grows stronger because it is no longer competing for attention with distractions, opinions, or societal pressure. Listening to the inner voice begins with awareness of subtle signals, a feeling of certainty, a quiet nudge, or a mental clarity that arises when decisions are considered without external influence. These signals are often drowned out by louder external opinions or habitual anxiety. Strengthening internal guidance requires recognizing these subtle cues and distinguishing them from fear, ego-driven desires, or reactive impulses. Journaling thoughts and emotions can serve as a tool to separate internal wisdom from external noise. Writing allows reflection without judgment, translating abstract insight into tangible awareness. External voices influence through persuasion, comparison, and expectation. Social pressures often frame success, worth, or happiness in terms unrelated to personal values, creating dissonance when internal guidance conflicts with these external definitions. To quiet these influences, establish conscious boundaries, limit time spent in judgmental environments, disengage from conversations that promote doubt, and selectively consume media aligned with constructive growth rather than distraction or anxiety. Boundaries are not isolation. They are the intentional creation of mental space for internal authority to flourish. Practice decision-making based on internal guidance. Begin with smaller choices to build trust in your judgment. Listen to your intuition, consider your values, and act deliberately, independent of external validation. Observe the results and reflect objectively. How did following the inner voice influence outcomes, emotional state, and confidence? Each experience reinforces the reliability of internal guidance, gradually reducing dependence on external approval and increasing self-trust. Repeated practice strengthens neural pathways that support autonomous thinking and intuitive decision-making. Mindset is a key factor in amplifying the inner voice. Embrace the belief that internal insight carries authority, and external input serves only as information rather than directive. Replace thoughts of doubt, comparison, or inadequacy with affirmations of competence, clarity, and self-reliance. Mental conditioning is essential. Habitual mental surrender to external opinions weakens autonomy, while deliberate reinforcement of internal authority builds resilience, confidence, and decisiveness. Reflection enhances the clarity of internal guidance. Daily self-review, meditation, or contemplation allows examination of actions, choices, and outcomes through the lens of personal values rather than external expectation. Identify moments where external noise influenced decisions and analyze the impact on energy, focus, and effectiveness. Reflection without judgment fosters awareness, encourages course correction, and strengthens alignment with intrinsic principles. This practice deepens understanding of how internal guidance manifests and how external influence can be minimized strategically. Visualization and mental rehearsal further amplify internal authority. Imagine handling situations relying solely on internal judgment, responding with composure and clarity. Picture navigating conflicting opinions or pressure while remaining anchored in personal values. These mental exercises condition the mind to trust internal wisdom, reinforcing the capacity to act decisively even when external influences are pervasive or persuasive. Over time, this strengthens confidence, reduces hesitation, and enhances the alignment between intention and action. Emotional regulation supports the inner voice. External noise often triggers anxiety, doubt, or overreaction, which obscures clarity in decision-making. Developing the ability to observe emotions without immediate reaction creates a buffer between stimulus and response. By maintaining calm awareness, internal guidance can be accessed reliably, free from distortion caused by reactive feelings. Techniques such as breathwork, mindful observation, or grounding exercises enhance emotional stability and preserve the clarity necessary for listening to the inner voice. Seek constructive external input selectively. Mentorship, feedback, or perspectives from trusted sources can inform decisions without dominating judgment. The key is discernment. External input should expand understanding, not dictate action. Maintain the stance that external guidance supplements, not overrides, internal authority. This balance allows learning, growth, and collaboration while protecting autonomy and reinforcing the habit of self-reliance. Habits play a role in amplifying internal guidance. Routine practices that cultivate reflection, skill development, and deliberate decision-making reinforce confidence and clarity. Consistency builds momentum. Repeated engagement with tasks aligned with personal goals strengthens trust in judgment, hones intuition, and quiets susceptibility to external pressure. Over time, habitual reliance on internal decision-making becomes instinctive, allowing the inner voice to dominate naturally over external influence. Energy management is crucial. External noise consumes attention and depletes mental and emotional resources, leaving less capacity for discernment, creativity, and action. Protect energy through intentional focus on internal priorities, limiting engagement with sources that drain, distract, or destabilize. Energy preserved is energy applied to reflection, learning, decision-making, and purposeful action. Strengthening the inner voice is inseparable from managing attention and conserving resources for what truly matters. Accountability reinforces trust in internal guidance. Own decisions and outcomes without external blame or justification, whether outcomes are favorable or challenging. Accepting responsibility deepens understanding, strengthens judgment, and builds resilience. Accountability transforms the inner voice from abstract intuition into proven competence, reinforcing self-reliance and diminishing the need for external validation or instruction. Experience becomes evidence of capability, solidifying confidence in independent thinking. Ultimately, strengthening the inner voice while quieting external influence is an exercise in sovereignty. It is the cultivation of an internal authority that guides decisions, governs action, and preserves clarity amid complexity. By intentionally creating space, observing subtle signals, limiting external noise, and practicing autonomous decision-making, the mind becomes attuned to its own wisdom. Energy is preserved, confidence is enhanced, and resilience is built. Life is navigated with intention rather than reaction, and every choice reflects the priorities, values, and insight of the self. In this alignment, the inner voice becomes a powerful anchor, unshaken by external turbulence, capable of guiding purposeful, empowered, and autonomous action. Number 10. Prioritize peace over reactive engagement. Peace is not merely the absence of conflict. It is a deliberate state of mind cultivated through conscious choice and disciplined attention. Prioritizing peace over reactive engagement is an intentional commitment to remain grounded, composed, centered, even when circumstances provoke anger, frustration, or anxiety. Many people live in a constant state of reaction, allowing external stimuli to dictate emotional responses, decisions, and energy expenditure. This reactive pattern depletes mental and emotional resources, erodes clarity, and undermines long-term effectiveness. Choosing peace first transforms interactions, preserves energy, and strengthens resilience, creating a foundation for thoughtful action and sustained empowerment. The first step is awareness of triggers. Observe moments when emotions surge uncontrollably in response to situations, people, or words. Notice physical sensations, tension in muscles, shallow breathing, racing thoughts that accompany reactive impulses. These signals indicate that a choice exists between reacting impulsively and responding from a grounded, peaceful state. Recognition of triggers is not self-criticism but an opportunity for intervention. It allows conscious action rather than unconscious surrender to agitation. Cultivating mindfulness is essential. Mindfulness anchors attention in the present moment, allowing observation without immediate action or judgment. Through practices like focused breathing, meditation, or conscious pauses, The mind develops the capacity to notice internal states without being swept away by them. This creates a buffer between stimulus and response, providing the space necessary to prioritize peace over reaction. As this skill strengthens, the nervous system learns to respond with measured composure instead of habitual reactivity, preserving clarity and energy for intentional action. Response strategies reinforce peace. Simple techniques, such as counting to 10, deep abdominal breathing, or briefly stepping away from a situation, can prevent impulsive engagement. These practices provide immediate tools to interrupt the automatic reactive cycle, allowing reflection and conscious choice. Over time, these strategies become instinctive, enabling consistent maintenance of equanimity, even under stress. Action emerges from reasoned consideration, rather than emotional compulsion, reinforcing autonomy and emotional stability. Perspective shifts support prioritization of peace. Ask whether engagement in conflict or reaction serves long-term goals, values, or well-being. Many reactive behaviors arise from habit, ego, or desire for immediate validation rather than substantive necessity. Evaluating the importance and consequences of engagement clarifies where effort is meaningful and where withdrawal preserves energy and composure. Prioritizing peace is not avoidance, but strategic allocation of attention, ensuring that emotional resources are directed toward constructive, purposeful action rather than depletion through fruitless conflict. Boundaries are instrumental. Protecting time, space, and emotional energy from unnecessary provocation reduces the frequency of reactive engagement. Set limits on interactions with individuals or environments that consistently trigger agitation or stress. Communicate needs assertively, delineating what is acceptable and what is not, without aggression. Boundaries preserve mental and emotional equilibrium, creating a stable foundation from which peace can be maintained even when external conditions are challenging. Internal dialogue shapes the ability to remain peaceful. Replace reactive thought patterns with reflective, empowering language. Instead of framing situations as personal attacks or injustices, interpret events with neutrality or curiosity. This is information I can use. I can choose how to respond, or this does not define my value. Language structures perception, and deliberate reframing reduces automatic emotional escalation. Over time, the mind internalizes these patterns, decreasing susceptibility to agitation and enhancing resilience. Energy management underpins sustainable peace. Reactivity consumes disproportionate mental and emotional resources, leaving less capacity for reflection, creativity, and deliberate action. Allocate attention intentionally to priorities aligned with growth, values, and long-term goals. Limit engagement in cycles of criticism, gossip, or unnecessary conflict. By investing energy where it produces meaningful outcomes, peace becomes both a tool and a state of being, rather than a passive ideal constantly threatened by external chaos. Empathy enhances peaceful engagement. Understanding that others' words and actions often reflect their own experiences, limitations, or emotional turbulence provides context for non-reactivity. Empathy does not excuse harmful behavior, but allows one to respond with clarity rather than compulsion. Recognizing the human condition in others creates psychological distance from provocation, reinforcing composure and the choice to act thoughtfully instead of reactively. Rituals of renewal support emotional equilibrium. Activities such as journaling, walking in nature, creative expression, or quiet reflection replenish the mind, reduce stress, and foster awareness. By consistently engaging in practices that center the self, the capacity to maintain peace in high-pressure situations is strengthened. Ritualized attention to personal equilibrium builds resilience, allowing the individual to navigate demanding circumstances without losing composure or clarity. Decision-making benefits from prioritized peace. When emotional turbulence is minimized, choices are evaluated with clarity, logic, and alignment with values rather than driven by impulse or agitation. Peace creates the cognitive space to weigh consequences, consider alternatives, and act strategically. By maintaining composure, decisions become deliberate and effective, reducing errors, conflict escalation, and regret associated with reactive behavior. Reflection solidifies growth. At the end of each day, review interactions and emotional responses, noting instances where peace was maintained and where reactive impulses emerged. Examine patterns, triggers, and successful strategies, using insights to adjust behavior proactively. Reflection transforms experience into practical intelligence, reinforcing habits of non-reactivity and promoting continuous refinement in the practice of prioritizing peace. Physical practices reinforce psychological peace. Regular movement, stretching, and breathwork regulate the nervous system, reducing susceptibility to tension and emotional escalation. Physical awareness grounds the mind in the present moment, fostering stability and composure. A disciplined approach to physical health supports the mental and emotional agility required to navigate challenging circumstances without surrendering to reactive impulses. Prioritizing peace over reactive engagement is a cumulative process. Each conscious choice to remain composed, each moment of restraint, and each act of reflection reinforces the capacity to navigate life intentionally. Over time, patterns of impulsivity give way to considered action, creating an internal environment of stability and self-mastery. Energy is preserved, clarity is amplified, and interactions are approached strategically rather than reactively, enhancing effectiveness, satisfaction, and influence in all areas of life. Ultimately, prioritizing peace is a declaration of sovereignty over one's mind and energy. It is an ongoing commitment to act from composure rather than compulsion, to evaluate engagement through the lens of purpose rather than emotion, and to maintain equilibrium even amid uncertainty. The practice transforms life from a series of reactive cycles into a sequence of deliberate, empowered actions. Peace becomes a choice, a resource, and a state of mastery that safeguards energy, strengthens resilience, and allows the individual to engage with the world on terms that reflect clarity, intention, and personal authority. Through unwavering commitment to this principle, life becomes navigable with stability, agency, and enduring calm, even in the face of external turbulence.